They say the fall doesn't kill you, it's the realization of who pushed you that stops your heart before you even hit the ground. Estela, why are you still standing in the hallway? The voice of a passing hotel maid snapped Estela out of her daydream. She gave a quick, nervous smile and adjusted the fabric of her dress over her stomach. At 4 months pregnant, the bump was becoming impossible to hide. But she didn't want to hide it anymore. Tonight was the night everything changed. She walked toward the elevator. Every step felt like she was floating. She looked at the text message on her screen one more time. Penthouse suite, room 1201. I need you here now. Love, Santino. They had been meeting in this hotel for months. It was their sanctuary. Santino was the star athlete and future alpha. Estela was the girl from the wrong side of the pack. Borders, the illegitimate daughter that her father tried to pretend didn't exist. They met in college. She was the one who spoke first. She was the one who confessed her love under the oak trees on campus. To her shock, he had felt the same. They dated for 4 years in total secrecy. When she found out she was pregnant, fear nearly choked her. But Santino had stepped up. He told her they would make it work. He convinced both packs to agree to a political marriage. The elevator doors slid open. Estela stepped into the plush hallway of the 12th floor. She could already imagine his arms around her. She could imagine him kneeling to kiss her belly. She reached the door to the suite. It wasn't locked. It stood open by just an inch. You're so much better than her. A woman's voice laughed from inside. Estela froze. Her heart skipped a beat. She recognized that high, mocking tone. It was Lacey, her stepsister. She actually thinks this marriage is about love, Lacey continued. The girl is a total fool. Estela moved closer to the gap in the door. Through the opening, she saw them. Santino was sitting on the sofa, and Lacey was draped across his lap. It's a business deal, Lacey, Santino said. His voice was cold. It was a voice Estela had never heard before. My father needs the Crescent Moonland. Your father wants to get rid of his shame. Marrying the illegitimate, wolfless daughter is the easiest way to bridge the gap. Lacey ran her fingers through his hair. But what about the baby? You aren't really going to raise a half-breed brat, are you? Santino let out a harsh sound that was supposed to be a laugh. The kid isn't mine. I'll make sure the world knows that the moment the papers are signed. Estela probably slept with half the campus to trap me. I'm just playing the part until I can name you as my true Luna. Estela felt like she had been punched in the throat. She couldn't breathe. The air in the hallway felt thin and freezing. She didn't think. She didn't plan. She shoved the door open so hard it hit the wall with a bang. You're a liar, Estela screamed. Santino didn't jump. He didn't even look guilty. He slowly pushed Lacey off his lap and stood up. He looked at Estela with pure boredom. You're early, he said. How could you say those things? Estela's voice cracked. She clutched her stomach, her knuckles white. This is your child, Santino. We've been together for years. Lacey stepped forward, a nasty grin on her face. 4 years of him pitying you, Estela. We've been fated mates since we were 18. We've been waiting for the right time to get rid of you. I'm going to tell the Alpha Council, Estela sobbed, backing away toward the terrace doors. I'll tell everyone what you are. No, you won't, Lacey said. She moved with supernatural speed, her shifter strength flaring. My fingers slipped from that 12-story balcony and his cold eyes watched me fall. I didn't pray for mercy. I whispered a vow into the wind. If there is a God, let me come back and tear their lives apart. Death was supposed to be the end, but a deep, powerful voice echoed in the darkness, promising that I would always belong to him. I didn't wake up on the pavement. I woke up on a cold dirt floor in a body that wasn't mine. Reborn as a silver-haired omega with violet eyes and skin that glows with ancient power, I was dragged from a cellar to be sold to the highest bidder. Among a crowd of predators, a general with eyes like ice bid $10 million just to own the ghost of the girl who shouldn't be breathing. Santino thinks his tragic accident is buried, but he has no idea that a masterpiece has been raised from the shadows. I'm not just a wolfless girl anymore. I'm a weapon with a debt to collect. And I'm going to make him beg for the mercy he never showed me. If you're ready to see a betrayal this deep met with a revenge even colder, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the pack so you don't miss a single chapter of this journey. The debt is about to be paid in blood. Don't forget to share this story with your fellow wolves as we dive into the next chapter of this twice-born Luna. Thanks for watching.
Lacey shoved Estela hard. Estela's heels caught on the edge of a heavy ceramic planter near the balcony railing. She tripped backward, her body slamming into the low stone wall. "Stop!" Estela cried out. She felt a sharp, hot pain shoot through her lower back. She looked down. A dark red stain was spreading across the front of her dress. Her breath came in ragged gasps. "Look at that," Lacey mocked, pointing at the blood. "Looks like the problem is solving itself. If you hadn't come here tonight, maybe your little mistake would have lived." Estela reached out, her fingers catching the edge of the railing as she slipped further back. "Santino, please help me." Santino walked to the edge. He looked down at her bleeding form. He didn't reach out his hand. He just watched. "You were always a burden, Estela," Santino said. Lacey raised her foot and slammed her heel down on Estela's fingers. Estela screamed as she lost her grip. She fell backward into the empty night air. The wind roared in her ears. The last thing she saw were the two people she trusted most, looking down at her with smiles. "I will kill you both," she thought as the world turned gray. "If there is a God, let me come back and tear your lives apart." Blackness swallowed her. Then a voice echoed in the dark. It was deep and powerful. It sounded like a promise. "You will always belong to me. I will find you." Estela's eyes flew open. She wasn't on the pavement. She was lying on a cold, dirt floor. A heavy boot kicked her in the side, sending a jolt of pain through her ribs. "Get up, Omega," a man barked. "The buyers are waiting, and you're the main event." Estela looked at her hands. They were smaller. Her skin was glowing with a strange, pale light. She wasn't in her body anymore. She was in a cellar, surrounded by the smell of iron and sweat. "I said move," the man yelled, grabbing her by the hair. Estela looked into a cracked mirror on the wall as she was dragged past. A face she didn't recognize stared back. She was beautiful, silver-haired, and covered in filth. "Who are you selling me to?" Estela rasped. "Shut your mouth and keep your eyes on the floor if you want to keep your tongue." The guard's voice was like sandpaper as he shoved Estela toward a set of heavy iron doors. The cellar was damp, but as the doors groaned open, the air changed. It became thick with the scent of expensive cigars, aged whiskey, and the heavy, musk-like pheromones of powerful alphas. Estela stumbled, her bare feet clicking against the polished marble of a grand hall. She looked up briefly, her violet eyes wide with shock. This wasn't a hotel. This was an auction house for the supernatural elite. "Look at that one," a voice whispered from the crowd. "The silver hair. She must be a pureblood Omega." Estela was forced onto a raised wooden platform. The bright stage lights burned her eyes. She felt exposed, her tattered rags barely covering her. She looked at her arms again. The skin was flawless, almost translucent. This body was younger, maybe 19, and it thrummed with a nervous energy she had never felt in her previous, wolfless life. "Gentlemen, look at the prize of the night," the auctioneer shouted, his voice booming through the microphone. "A rare silver moon Omega. She has no pack, no family, and no mark. She is a blank canvas for whoever is strong enough to claim her." Estela scanned the faces in the crowd. They weren't men. They were predators. They looked at her like she was a piece of meat. Her stomach turned. She thought of Santino. He would have loved a place like this. He would have been right in the front row, bidding on a girl just to break her. "We start the bidding at $500,000, the auctioneer yelled. 600, a man in the back shouted. 800, another roared. Estela's heart hammered against her ribs. She was a person, not a trophy. She tried to step back, but the silver chains around her wrists jerked her forward. The silver burned, a constant reminder that this new body was sensitive to the metal. 1 million. A portly alpha in the front row called out, his eyes traveling over Estela with a sickening grin. "I'll have her scrubbing my floors by morning." The auctioneer raised his gavel. 1 million going once, going twice. 10 million. The voice didn't come from the crowd. It came from the back of the room, near the shadows of the entrance. The voice was deep, steady, and carried a weight that made the entire room go silent. It was the voice from her dream. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. A man stepped into the light. He was tall, with shoulders that seemed to take up the entire hallway. He wore a black military coat with silver buttons, and his hair was as dark as a raven's wing. His eyes were a piercing, icy blue that seemed to cut right through Estela. 10 million, the auctioneer stammered, his face turning pale. General Valerius, we didn't know you were in the city. I don't care what you knew, Valerius said. He didn't look at the auctioneer. He kept his eyes locked on Estela. The girl is mine. Unless someone else wants to challenge my bid. He rested a hand on the hilt of a black tactical knife strapped to his thigh. No one moved. No one even breathed. The portly alpha who had bid 1 million suddenly found a great deal of interest in his own shoes. Sold, the auctioneer squeaked, slamming the gavel down. To General Valerius of the Northern Iron Pack. The guard grabbed Estela's chain and led her off the stage toward the man. Valerius stood still as a statue as she was brought to him. Up close, he smelled like winter air and pine needles. He was terrifyingly handsome, but his face was a mask of cold stone. He reached out, his large hand gripping the chain. He didn't pull it. He just held it. Can you walk? He asked. His voice was quieter now, but no less intense. Estela found her voice, though it was shaky. I think so. Good. Because we aren't staying here, he said. He turned and began to walk, expecting her to follow. Estela had no choice. As she passed the exit, she saw a newspaper discarded on a chair. The date caught her eye. It was only 1 day after her death. She hadn't traveled through time. She had simply been moved. Santino and Lacey were still out there, probably celebrating her accident. Where are you taking me? Estela asked as they reached a black armored SUV waiting outside. Valerius opened the door and gestured for her to get in. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. You're going to my estate, he said. And you're going to tell me exactly how a dead girl ended up on an auction block. Estela's blood ran cold. What did you say? I know who you were, Estela, Valerius whispered. And I know you shouldn't be breathing. The interior of the SUV was silent and smelled of leather. Estela sat as far away from Valerius as possible, her back pressed against the door. The silver chain still bit into her wrists. Valerius reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black key. Give me your hands. Estela hesitated. Why? Because the silver is making you bleed, he said, his tone impatient. And I don't like my property being damaged before I get answers. Estela slowly held out her hands. Valerius took them in his. His skin was scorching hot compared to her cold fingers. With 2 quick clicks, the shackles fell away. Estela rubbed her raw skin, feeling a strange sensation of relief. You said you knew who I was, Estela said, her voice gaining a bit of strength. That's impossible. I've never seen you before in my life. Valerius leaned back, watching the city lights blur past the window. You were the girl who fell from the hotel. The tragic accident of the Crescent Moon Pack. The news is everywhere. They're calling it a suicide driven by the shame of being wolfless. Estela's hands curled into fists. Suicide? They pushed me. I know, Valerius said calmly. Estela blinked. How could you possibly know that? Because I was in the building across the street, Valerius said, turning to look at her. I saw the flash of the struggle. I saw the girl fall. And then an hour later, I felt a soul shift in the atmosphere. Only a high-ranking Omega soul can jump bodies like that. I tracked the energy to that cellar. Estela felt like the world was spinning. This man wasn't just a soldier. He was something else. Why did you buy me? If you know what I am, why not just leave me there? Because I have a common enemy, Valerius said. Santino and the Ridgeback Pack have been stealing territory from the north for years. They think they are untouchable. They think they can kill whoever they want and call it business. He leaned forward, his icy eyes searching hers. You want revenge. I want their downfall. It seems we have a deal. I never agreed to a deal, Estela reminded him. You're an Omega without a pack, Estela. In this world, that's a death sentence, Valerius stated. You stay with me, and I'll give you the resources to tear Santino's world down. In exchange, you play the part of my mate. Estela recoiled. Your mate? I don't even know you. It's a cover, Valerius said, his voice dropping an octave. My pack is restless. They want an alpha with a Luna. If I bring home a beautiful Omega, They stop asking questions about my leadership. You get your revenge, I get my peace. The SUV slowed down as it approached a massive iron gate. Beyond it sat a fortress of stone and glass, nestled against the side of a mountain. What happens if I say no? Estela asked. Valerius looked at the gates as they opened. Then I drop you off at the nearest pack border, and let them decide what to do with a masterless wolf. I wonder how long you'd last. Estela looked at her small, fragile hands. She thought of Santino's face as he watched her fall. She thought of Lacey's laugh. A cold, hard knot of determination formed in her chest. I want him to lose everything, Estela said, her voice cold. I want him to feel the same fear I felt when I was falling. Valerius gave a small, dark smile. Then we are going to get along just fine. As the car pulled up to the front of the estate, a group of soldiers stood at attention. A woman with sharp features and a scar across her bridge of her nose stepped forward. General, the woman said, bowing her head. The scouts report that the Ridgeback Pack is hosting a gala tomorrow night to celebrate the unification of the two packs. Valerius stepped out of the car and offered his hand to Estela. Perfect, Valerius said. I think it's time for the general to introduce his new bride to the world. Estela stared at his hand. This was it. There was no going back. She placed her hand in his. Just remember, Valerius whispered as he pulled her close. You belong to the North now. Don't make me regret saving you. Stop moving, or I will pin your ears to your head. The woman with the scarred nose, whose name was Marisol, tugged a silver-threaded corset tight around Estela's waist. Estela let out a sharp gasp, her hands gripping the edge of the vanity table. It had been less than 24 hours since she was shivering in a cellar, and now she was being dressed in silks that cost more than her father's house. The general says you need to look like a queen, not a stray, Marisol muttered, though her eyes weren't unkind. She stepped back, gesturing toward the floor-to-ceiling mirror. Estela turned. She barely recognized the woman staring back. The silver-blonde hair had been brushed until it shone like moonlight. The deep violet eyes were framed by long, dark lashes. The dress was a deep, midnight blue that clung to her curves, trailing behind her like a shadow. I don't look like a wolf, Estela whispered, touching her throat. I look like a target. In this pack, there is no difference, Marisol replied, handing her a pair of diamond earrings. The Ridgeback Gala is a Shark Tank. They are celebrating the death of the wolfless daughter and the rise of a new alpha. If you falter for even a second, they will smell the fear on you. A heavy knock sounded at the door. It didn't wait for an invitation to open. Valerius stepped in, looking lethal in a charcoal gray suit that emphasized his massive frame. He stopped in his tracks, his icy blue eyes raking over Estela from head to toe. For a heartbeat, the room felt smaller. The air hummed with that same ozone scent that followed him everywhere. You'll do, Valerius said, his voice a low rumble. He walked over and held out a velvet box. Inside was a collar made of delicate silver lace, inlaid with a single massive sapphire. Estela flinched. Is that a slave collar? It's a Luna's choker, Valerius corrected, his fingers brushing her neck as he fastened it. His touch was like fire on her skin. In their eyes you are my mate. My property. My heart. If you don't wear it, every alpha in that room will think you're up for grabs. Estela looked into his eyes through the mirror. And what am I to you truly? Valerius leaned down, his lips ghosting against her ear. You are my best weapon, Estela. Don't misfire. He pulled away, offering his arm. The car is waiting. Santino is currently giving a speech about his tragic loss. It would be a shame to miss the ending. Estela took his arm. Her fingers trembled, but she forced her chin up. She wasn't the broken girl who fell from the balcony anymore. She was a ghost with a debt to collect. The Ridgeback Pack estate was glowing with 1,000 fairy lights. Music drifted through the open French doors, and the smell of roasting meat and expensive champagne filled the air. To anyone else, it looked like a fairy tale. To Estela, it looked like a crime scene. As the black SUV pulled up to the red carpet, the paparazzi's flashes turned the world white. Keep your head up, Valerius commanded softly. Look at them like they are beneath your feet. The valet opened the door. Valerius stepped out first, extending his hand. When Estela took it and stepped onto the carpet, a literal silence fell over the crowd. The whispers started instantly. Who is she? Look at that hair. Is she a silver moon? The general brought a mate? They walked through the grand foyer. Estela's heart was drumming a frantic beat against her ribs. She saw familiar faces. Cousins who had mocked her. Aunts who had ignored her. None of them recognized her. To them, the ugly wolfless girl was dead. Then she saw him. Santino stood on a small dais at the end of the ballroom. He looked handsome, wearing a white suit that made him look like a hero. Beside him, Lacey was draped in gold, her hand resting possessively on his arm. They were laughing, clinking glasses with the alpha of the crescent moon, Estela's own father. There he is, Valerius whispered, his grip on Estela's waist tightening. The man who thinks he won. As if sensing the shift in the room's energy, Santino looked up. His smile faltered. His eyes moved from Valerius to the woman on his arm. Estela didn't look away. She channeled every ounce of the cold rage she felt when she hit the dirt in that cellar. She gave him a slow, mysterious smile. The smile of a predator. Santino stepped off the dais, his face pale. Lacey followed, her eyes narrowed in confusion. They walked straight toward them, the crowd parting to make way for the confrontation. General Valerius, Santino said, his voice tight. We weren't expecting the North to grace us with their presence tonight. Especially during a time of mourning. I heard there was a celebration of unity, Valerius said, his voice echoing in the silent hall. I thought it was the perfect time to introduce my fated mate. This is Esmeralda. Estela felt a thrill of electricity at the fake name. She stepped forward, dipping into a graceful, shallow bow. A pleasure, Alpha Santino, Estela said. Her voice was smooth, a perfect imitation of a highborn lady. I was so sorry to hear about your recent loss. It must be devastating to lose something so precious so suddenly. Lacey stepped forward, her scent turning sour with jealousy. Who are you? We've never heard of a silver moon in this territory. Estela turned her violet gaze on her stepsister, the woman who had kicked her fingers off a ledge, the woman who had murdered her child. I've spent a long time in hiding, Estela said, her smile widening. But I decided it was time to come back to the light. After all, some things just refused to stay buried. Don't you agree, Lacey? Lacey flinched as if she'd been slapped. She looked at Santino, her eyes darting with sudden, sharp fear. You, Santino stammered, his eyes searching Estela's face. He was looking for the girl he killed, but all he saw was a beautiful, powerful Omega he didn't know. You look familiar. Doi? Estela asked, taking a glass of champagne from a passing tray. She took a slow sip, her eyes never leaving his. Perhaps you've seen me in your dreams, Alpha. Or your nightmares. Before Santino could respond, Valerius leaned in. I hope you don't mind, Santino. My mate is very fond of dancing. I'm sure you wouldn't object to us taking the floor. It wasn't a question. It was a command. As Valerius led Estela toward the center of the ballroom, she could feel Santino's eyes burning into her back. She could feel the foundation of his world beginning to crack. You're doing well, Valerius murmured as he took her hand for the waltz. He's terrified. Good, Estela whispered, leaning into him as the music swelled. I want him to be looking over his shoulder for the rest of his life. Oh, it won't be that long, Valerius replied. Look toward the balcony. Estela looked. Standing in the shadows of the upper level was Marisol, and she wasn't alone. She was holding a folder. The same folder that contained the hotel's security footage from the night Estela died. Estela's heart leaped. You have the footage? I have everything, Valerius said. But tonight isn't about the evidence. It's about the psychological break. Look at him now. Estela glanced over Valerius's shoulder. Santino was standing by the bar, downing a drink with a shaking hand. Lacey was hissing in his ear, her face twisted in rage. The game had begun. Wait, Estela said, her breath catching. Who is that man talking to my father? A man in a dark red suit was gesturing toward them. He had a jagged scar running from his temple to his jaw, and the power radiating from him made the hair on Estela's arm stand up. Valerius's expression darkened instantly. That is Alpha Julian. He's the head of the Shadowclaw pack. And if he's here, it means Santino has more friends than I thought. Julian looked directly at Estela. He didn't look confused or charmed. He looked like he knew exactly who she was. He raised his glass to her and mouthed a single word. Found you. Estela's blood turned to ice. That was the voice. Not the general's. The voice from the darkness was the man in the red suit. Estela breathed. You're shaking. Valerius's voice was a low vibration against her temple as they moved in perfect synchronization across the dance floor. He gripped her hand tighter, his thumb tracing a steadying line over her knuckles. The man in the red suit, Estela whispered, her eyes darting toward the edge of the ballroom. Alpha Julian. He looked at me like he was seeing through my skin. He's the one, Valerius. The voice I heard when I was dying. Valerius stiffened. The ozone scent around him sharpened, a sign of his shifting temper. He steered her toward the balcony doors, away from the prying eyes of the crowd. Julian is a necromancer among wolves, Valerius hissed, his voice barely audible over the swelling orchestra. He doesn't just lead the Shadowclaw pack. He deals in things that should stay in the grave. If he recognized your soul, then this gala just turned into a graveyard. They stepped out onto the cold stone terrace. The night air was a relief against Estela's flushed skin. She leaned against the railing, the same kind of railing she had fallen from only days ago. This time she didn't look down. She looked at the man in front of her. Why didn't you tell me about him? She demanded. Because I didn't think he would be here, Valerius replied, his blue eyes scanning the shadows. He rarely leaves the northern wastes. If he's here, it's because he felt the ripple of your rebirth. A soul shift like yours is a beacon to a man like him. A soft, rhythmic clapping sound echoed from the dark corner of the terrace. A beacon? Oh, Valerius, you underestimate yourself. A smooth melodic voice said. Alpha Julian stepped out of the darkness. In the moonlight, his red suit looked like dried blood. The scar on his face twitched as he smiled, revealing teeth that were just a little too sharp to be human. It wasn't a beacon, Julian said, his eyes fixed solely on Estela. It was a summons. I put a mark on her soul the moment she cried out for vengeance. I simply came to collect my investment. Valerius stepped in front of Estela, his hand going to the concealed holster beneath his jacket. She isn't an investment, Julian. She's my mate. You're trespassing on northern interests. Julian laughed, a sound like dry leaves skittering on a tombstone. Your mate? Please. You bought her at a common auction to bait Santino. You're using a Ferrari to pull a plow, Valerius. Such a waste of potential. Julian leaned to the side, trying to catch Estela's gaze. How does it feel, little ghost? To be back in a body that actually has the power to burn your enemies? Does the Omega blood hum in your veins? Estela stepped out from behind Valerius. Her heart was pounding, but she refused to be a shield. Who are you to me? I am the one who gave you the second chance you begged for, Julian said, his voice dropping to a hypnotic whisper. And I am the one who can take it back if you prove to be boring. Leave, Valerius growled, his eyes glowing a predatory amber. Before I forget that we are on neutral ground. Julian raised his hands in a mocking gesture of peace. I'm going. I have a meeting with the guest of honor anyway. Santino is so very easy to manipulate when he's panicked. He turned to go, but paused, looking back at Estela. Be careful, Esmeralda. The general wants to use you to win a war. I want to use you to change the world. Think about which one offers more satisfaction. With a flick of his wrist, Julian vanished into the shadows of the garden below. We're leaving. Now. Valerius didn't wait for Estela's response. He grabbed her arm, firmly but without the bruising force Santino used, and began leading her back through the ballroom. We can't leave yet. Estela hissed. The footage. Marisol is waiting for the signal. The plan has changed, Valerius said, his jaw tight. Julian is a wild card. If he tells Santino who you really are before we have the council's protection, they won't just kill you. They'll erase you. As they neared the exit, a frantic figure blocked their path. It was Lacey. Her gold dress was wrinkled, and her eyes were wide with a mix of wine and terror. You. Lacey pointed a trembling finger at Estela. I know that look. I don't know how you're doing it, but I know it's you. The surrounding guests began to murmur, their heads turning toward the scene. Lacey, you're making a fool of yourself, Valerius said, his voice echoing with alpha authority. Step aside. No. Lacey screamed, her voice cracking. She's a ghost. Santino, tell them. She died. We watched her. The music stopped. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Santino rushed over, his face flushed. He grabbed Lacey's shoulder, trying to pull her back. Lacey, shut up, Santino hissed. You're drunk. I'm not, she wailed, looking at Estela with pure hatred. Look at her eyes. Those are Estela's eyes. She's come back to haunt us. Estela felt a surge of cold, calm power. She didn't shrink away. Instead, she took a step toward Lacey, leaning in so only the two of them, and the nearby Santino, could hear. You seem stressed, Lacey, Estela said, her voice like silk. Perhaps you're seeing ghosts because your conscience is heavy? I've heard that murderers often lose their minds before they lose their lives. Santino's eyes went wide. The glass in his hand shattered, shards of crystal cutting into his palm. What did you say? Santino whispered, his voice shaking. I said, I hope you enjoy the rest of your party, Estela replied. She turned to Valerius and gave a sharp nod. The air in here is becoming stagnant. As Valerius led her out the front doors, Estela saw Marisol in the balcony shadows. Marisol didn't drop the files. Instead, she held up a thumb drive and tapped her earpiece. The signal was sent. As they reached the SUV, the massive projection screens in the ballroom, meant to show a slideshow of Santino and Lacey's love story, flickered and changed. Estela looked back through the glass doors just as the image cleared. It was the grainier, black and white footage of the hotel hallway. It showed Santino and Lacey entering room 1201. It showed a pregnant woman in a white dress walking toward the door. The screams from inside the ballroom were the sweetest sound Estela had ever heard. Drive, Valerius commanded the chauffeur. As the car sped away from the estate, Estela watched the chaos in the rearview mirror. She had taken their reputation. She had taken their peace. But as she looked at the dark forest passing by, she felt a heavy weight in her pocket. She reached in and pulled out a small, red velvet card that hadn't been there before. The dance isn't over, little ghost. See you at the border. G. Valerius, Estela said, her voice trembling. Julian put something in my pocket. Valerius snatched the card, his face turning pale as he read it. He looked at Estela, his eyes filled with a sudden, desperate urgency. He didn't just mark your soul, Estela, Valerius said. He claimed a debt. And in the north, a soul debt is paid in blood. The world is burning, and you're staring at a piece of cardboard. Valerius's voice snapped Estela's attention away from the red velvet card. He snatched the card from her hand and shredded it into a dozen pieces, tossing them onto the floor of the SUV. Outside, the sirens of the packed police echoed through the valley, heading straight for the Ridgeback estate. The footage is out, Estela said, her heart hammering against her ribs. The council has to act. They saw him, Valerius. They saw them both. The council is a den of snakes, Estela, Valerius warned, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. They don't care about morality. They care about stability. Santino's father is the head of finance for the United Pax. He will try to buy his way out of a murder charge. Before Estela could respond, her new phone buzzed in her lap. It was a notification from a local news stream. The headline flashed in bold, jagged letters. Santino Ridgeback arrested. Lacey Crescent Moon in custody. The image below the headline showed Santino being led away in handcuffs, his white suit stained with the champagne he had spilled. He looked small. He looked weak. It's happening, Estela whispered. It's only the beginning, Valerius replied. Your father will disown you again, or rather he will disown the dead Estela to save his own skin. But he's going to come looking for Esmeralda next. He needs to know who leaked that footage. The car swerved suddenly as a dark shape blurred across the road. The driver slammed on the brakes, sending Estela flying forward. Valerius's arm shot out, catching her across the chest to steady her. What was that? The driver yelled, his hands white on the steering wheel. The headlights illuminated the road. Standing in the center of the asphalt was a massive wolf. Its fur was the color of dried blood, and its eyes burned with a sickly green fire. It wasn't a normal shifter. It was a shadow hulk, one of Julian's constructs. "Stay in the car," Valerius commanded. He reached into the glove box and pulled out a heavy silver-weighted pistol. "Valerius, no." Estela grabbed his sleeve. "Julian said he wanted to see me at the border. This is a trap." "I don't care what he said," Valerius growled. "No one stops my vehicle." He stepped out into the night. The cold air rushed in, smelling of rot and ancient magic. The shadow hulk let out a sound that wasn't a bark or a howl. It was a scream of 1,000 tortured souls. Estela watched through the glass as the beast lunged. Valerius fired 3 shots, the silver bullets sparking against the creature's hide, but it didn't slow down. It slammed into Valerius, throwing him against the hood of the car. "Valerius!" Estela scrambled for the door handle, but it was locked from the outside. The shadow hulk pinned Valerius down, but it didn't bite. It leaned in, its green eyes reflecting in the windshield. Then the creature's jaw moved, and Julian's voice came out of its throat. "The council has Santino," the beast rasped. "But I have the debt. Bring the girl to the Grey Stone Bridge by midnight, General. Or I start killing your soldiers one by one." The beast dissolved into a cloud of black smoke, leaving Valerius coughing on the pavement. The Greystone Bridge sat on the jagged edge between the Northern Territory and the no-man's land of the Shadowclaw Pack. The wind howled through the canyon below, sounding like the ghosts of the people who had been exiled there. Estela stood at the edge of the bridge, her midnight blue dress fluttering around her legs. Valerius stood 5 paces behind her, his hand never leaving his weapon. 10 of his elite guards were stationed in the trees, their scents masked, but Estela knew Julian already knew they were there. "You shouldn't have come," Valerius muttered. "I could have sent a strike team." "And he would have killed your men," Estela said, her voice surprisingly steady. "He wants me. He says he owns my second life. Let's find out what that costs." A flame ignited in the middle of the bridge. Julian appeared as if he had stepped out of the fire itself. He was dressed in a long black leather coat, his scarred face illuminated by the flickering orange light. "Punctual," Julian said, checking a silver pocket watch. "I like that in a subordinate." "I am not your subordinate," Estela snapped. Julian smiled, walking toward her with a predatory grace. Valerius stepped forward, but Julian raised a hand, and an invisible wall of force slammed Valerius back into the car. "Don't interrupt, General. This is a private conversation between a creator and his masterpiece," Julian said. He stopped inches from Estela. He smelled of old parchment and wood smoke. "You wanted revenge," Julian whispered, reaching out to tuck a strand of silver hair behind her ear. "I gave it to you. The footage? That was my gift. I hacked the hotel servers weeks ago. I just waited for the right soul to inhabit a body worthy of using it." Estela's eyes widened. You knew? You've been planning this since before I died." "I've been looking for a Silver Moon Omega for a century," Julian admitted. "Your death was just the catalyst I needed. You had the rage. You had the motive. And now you have the body." He leaned in closer, his voice a dark caress. "The debt is simple, Estela. I don't want your money. I don't want your body. I want your blood." He pulled a small crystal vial from his pocket. "The blood of a reborn silver moon is the final ingredient for a ritual that will break the council's hold on the North forever. Give me 3 drops, and you are free of me. You can go back to your general and playhouse." Estela looked at the vial. It seemed too easy. "And if I refuse?" Julian's eyes turned pitch black. "Then I tell the council that Esmeralda is an abomination. I tell them you are a soul thief who stole the body of a young girl. They will hunt you down and burn you alive, Estela. And Valerius will be executed for harboring you." Estela looked back at Valerius. He was struggling against the invisible barrier, his face contorted in rage. She looked at her hands. Hands that were beautiful, powerful, and borrowed. She took the vial from Julian's hand. 3 drops, she said, her voice cold. "And then you stay out of my way." She bit her finger, the sharp sting of her own teeth bringing a metallic tang to her tongue. She let 3 crimson drops fall into the crystal. The liquid inside began to glow with an eerie, pulsating violet light. Julian snatched the vial back, His face lit with a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. "A pleasure doing business with you, little ghost," Julian said. He flicked his fingers, and the barrier around Valerius shattered. As Julian began to fade into the mist, he called out one last thing. "Oh, and Estela? You might want to check the news again. It seems Santino has a very expensive lawyer, and he just made a statement about a twin sister you never knew you had." Estela's heart froze. "What? The game just got a lot more complicated." Julian laughed as he vanished. "He's going to walk free, isn't he?" Estela stood in the middle of Valerius's war room, her eyes glued to the massive television screen. The news ticker was moving so fast it was a blur of red and white. Santino's father, the high alpha of the Ridgebacks, stood on the courthouse steps. Beside him was a woman who looked exactly like the Esmeralda body Estela now inhabited. "My son is a victim of a cruel hoax," the high alpha announced to the sea of microphones. The woman seen in that doctored footage was not Estela. It was her long-lost twin sister, Sophia, who has struggled with mental instability for years. Santino was trying to restrain her, not harm her. Estela felt like the floor had turned into quicksand. "Sophia? I don't have a twin. My father never mentioned another daughter." Valerius paced behind her, his boots clicking rhythmically against the stone. He didn't need to mention one until he needed a scapegoat. They've spent the last 6 hours forging birth certificates and medical records. In the eyes of the law, you aren't a ghost seeking revenge, you're a hallucination. "And the blood on the dress? The fall?" Estela turned to him, her violet eyes flashing. "They can't explain that away." "They don't have to," Valerius said, stopping to face her. "They've claimed Sophia staged the fall with a harness to frame Santino. Since no body was found at the scene, the council is leaning toward dismissing the murder charge. They're calling it a publicity stunt by a rival pack." Estela slammed her fist onto the table. "They're making me a liar in 2 different lives." A sharp chime interrupted them. Marisol entered the room, her expression grim. "General, the council has issued a subpoena. They want Esmeralda to testify. They want to prove that you found a look-alike to destroy the Ridgeback reputation." "If I go there, they'll test my scent," Estela whispered. "They'll know I'm an Omega without a past." "Then we give them a past," Valerius said, a cold light entering his eyes. "Marisol, get the jet ready. We're heading to the old temple in the north. If the council wants a twin, we'll give them a miracle." "What are you talking about?" Estela asked. Valerius grabbed his coat. "Julian took your blood for a ritual. It's time we find out exactly what that ritual did to your DNA. If you're going to survive that witness stand, you need to be more than a girl in a borrowed body. You need to be a wolf." The air in the northern mountains was so thin it felt like breathing needles. Estela huddled into the fur-lined cloak Valerius had given her as they hiked toward the ruins of the old temple. The stone pillars rose out of the snow like the ribs of a giant, ancient beast. "Why here?" Estela asked, her breath hitching in the cold. "This is where the first silver moons were blessed," Valerius explained, guiding her through a narrow archway. "Julian used your blood to trigger something. I felt it the moment you gave it to him. Your scent is changing, Estela." She stopped and sniffed the air. She smelled the pine, the snow, and Valerius's ozone scent. But beneath it, there was something new. Something metallic and sweet. "I don't feel different," she said. "Wait until we reach the altar," Valerius replied. They stepped into a circular chamber open to the sky. In the center sat a basin of black obsidian. To Estela's horror, the basin was filled with the same glowing violet liquid she had seen in Julian's vial. "He was here," Estela gasped, backing away. "Julian was here tonight. He left this for you," Valerius said, pointing to a sprawling inscription carved into the snow around the basin. "The price is paid. The cage is open. Claim what was stolen." "What does it mean?" Estela asked. "It means your rebirth wasn't just a soul jump," Valerius said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Julian didn't just put you in a new body. He put you back into your own potential. This body isn't a stranger's, Estela. It's the version of you that should have existed if your father hadn't suppressed your wolf with silver poisoning when you were a child." Estela's heart stopped. "My father poisoned me? To keep you weak?" To keep you illegitimate, Valerius said. But the fall broke the seal. The rebirth accelerated the growth. Drink from the basin, Estela. Complete the shift. She looked at the glowing liquid. If she drank it, she would become the very thing she had been told was impossible. She would be a shifter. She would have the strength to tear Santino's throat out with her own teeth. She stepped forward and cupped her hands, dipping them into the cold, violet water. She drank. For a second, there was nothing but silence. Then the world exploded. A roar echoed through the temple. Not from the woods, but from inside Estela's own chest. Her bones cracked and reformed. Her vision shifted into a kaleidoscope of heat signatures and shadows. The pain was agonizing, a white-hot fire that burned away the last remnants of the weak girl who had fallen from the hotel. When the light faded, Estela was no longer standing on two legs. A massive wolf, coat as white as the falling snow and eyes the color of a dying star, stood in the center of the temple. Her power radiated outward, cracking the obsidian basin. Valerius knelt in the snow, his head bowed in genuine respect. "Welcome back, Luna." The wolf that was Estela threw her head back and let out a howl that shook the mountains. It wasn't a cry of pain. It was a declaration of war. She shifted back, her human skin steaming in the freezing air. Valerius quickly wrapped his cloak around her. Estela stood tall, her gaze harder than the ice around them. "I'm ready for the council," Estela said, her voice echoing with a new, terrifying authority. "And I'm ready to meet my twin." "The hearing is in 4 hours," Valerius said. "Are you going to tell them who you are?" Estela looked toward the south, where her enemies were hiding behind lawyers and lies. "No," Estela said, a dark smile playing on her lips. "I'm going to let them lie until they hang themselves. And then, I'm going to show them what happens when a ghost finds its teeth. Keep your eyes forward. Do not let them see you blink." Valerius's whisper was the only thing grounding Estela, as the massive iron-bound doors of the High Council Hall swung open. The room was a cathedral of stone, lit by flickering torches that cast long, dancing shadows against the walls. 12 alphas sat in a semicircle on a raised dais, their scents clashing in a chaotic storm of dominance. Estela walked down the center aisle. She no longer felt like a girl hiding in a borrowed body. With every step, the new strength in her limbs hummed. She could hear the heartbeats of every guard in the room. She could smell the sour sweat of fear coming from the front row. There sat Santino and Lacey. Santino looked confident, leaning back with a smug grin. Lacey was dressed in a modest white suit, playing the part of the grieving sister. But as Estela approached, Santino's grin faltered. He sniffed the air, his eyes widening. The wolfless girl he had murdered didn't have a scent. The woman standing before him now smelled like a blizzard, cold, sharp, and ancient. "General Valerius," the head elder spoke, his voice like grinding gravel. "You bring this woman Esmeralda to testify against the future alpha of the Ridgebacks. But the Ridgebacks have presented evidence that the woman in your video is Sophia, the twin sister of the deceased Estela. What say you?" Valerius stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his dress sword. "I say that the Ridgebacks are better at storytelling than they are at being honorable. This woman is no stranger. And she is certainly no twin. She is a liar," Lacey shouted, jumping to her feet. "She's a shapeshifter hired by the North to steal our land." The head elder slammed his gavel. "Silence. Esmeralda, step to the altar. Place your hand on the silver stone." A murmur went through the crowd. The silver stone was a relic that burned anyone telling a lie. For a shifter, it was painful. For a liar, it was agony. Estela didn't hesitate. She walked to the pedestal and placed her palm flat against the glowing white stone. "Tell us," the elder commanded. "Did Santino Ridgeback push Estela Crescent Moon from that balcony with the intent to kill?" Estela looked directly at Santino. She felt the silver heat of the stone trying to bite into her skin, but her new silver moon blood absorbed the energy. It didn't burn. It glowed. "He didn't just push her," Estela's voice rang out, amplified by the hall's acoustics. "He watched her fall. He laughed as her blood hit the pavement. And he did it all while promising his mate, Lacey, that he would disown his own child." The stone flared with a brilliant, blinding white light. The truth. The room erupted in shouts. Santino's father stood up, his face purple with rage. The stone is malfunctioning. She's using northern witchcraft. The stone never lies. Valerius roared over the noise. Wait! Santino yelled, stepping forward. He was trembling now. Even if the video is real. Even if I was there. That woman isn't Estela. She looks like her, but Estela was a weak, wolfless nothing. Look at this woman. She's an alpha-class shifter. It's impossible. Estela smiled. It was the smile of a trap snapping shut. You're right, Santino, she said softly. Estela was wolfless. Because her father was feeding her silver dust in her tea every morning for 20 years. She turned to her father, who was sitting in the corner, trying to remain invisible. Isn't that right, Alpha Silas? The silence that followed was absolute. Alpha Silas stood up, his hands shaking as he gripped the railing. I don't know what she's talking about, Silas stammered. You knew my mother was a silver moon, Estela said, stepping toward him. Each word was a strike. You knew that if I shifted, the council would recognize my claim to your seat. So you kept me sick. You kept me small. You told me I was a mistake, so I would never look for my own power. This is a trial for murder, not family drama. Santino's lawyer interjected. It is a trial for the truth, the head elder barked. Alpha Silas, step forward. If this woman is a silver moon, her blood will react to yours. If she is the twin Sophia, the bond will be different. Silas looked like he wanted to bolt, but Valerius's guards blocked the exits. He was forced to the altar. A small ritual knife was produced. The elder cut Silas's hand, letting a few drops of blood fall into a ceramic bowl. Then he turned to Estela. She held out her hand. She didn't flinch as the blade nicked her skin. Her blood was dark, almost violet under the torchlight. As soon as her blood touched Silas's, the bowl didn't just simmer, it hissed. The liquid turned into a violent, swirling vortex of silver and black. A phantom image began to form in the steam rising from the bowl. It wasn't two sisters. It was a single thread of light, vibrating with the power of a broken seal. The blood is identical, the elder whispered, his voice trembling with awe. There is no twin. There is only the daughter who was suppressed. He looked up at the room, his eyes hard. Santino Ridgeback. Lacey Crescent Moon. You are charged with the attempted murder of a high-blood Luna. And Alpha Silas, you are charged with the treasonous poisoning of a pack heir. No. Lacey screamed, grabbing Santino's arm. Santino, do something. Santino didn't look at her. He was looking at Estela. For the first time, he saw her. Truly saw her. Not as a pawn, but as the predator he had accidentally created. I'll kill you myself. Santino roared. He didn't wait for the guards. He shifted mid-air, his clothes shredding as a massive brown wolf lunged over the tables toward Estela. The crowd screamed, scattering in every direction. Estela, move. Valerius shouted, reaching for his gun. But Estela didn't move. She didn't need to. She felt the power of the old temple surging through her heart. As Santino's jaws snapped inches from her face, she shifted. The white wolf emerged in a flash of light. She was nearly twice Santino's size. She met him in the air, her paws slamming into his chest and pinning him to the stone floor with a bone-crunching thud. She stood over him, her teeth bared at his throat. One move, and he was dead. The council guards leveled their spears. Hold, the elder commanded. Estela looked down at the whimpering wolf that was Santino. She could smell his terror. She could taste his defeat. She leaned in, her golden eyes burning into his. I told you I would find you. She sent the thought directly into his mind. She didn't kill him. Death was too easy. She shifted back into her human form, standing over him while he lay broken on the floor. I want them to live, Estela said to the council, her voice cold and clear. I want them stripped of their ranks. I want them marked as rogues and cast into the gray wastes. Let them see what it's like to be nothing for the rest of their lives. The elder nodded slowly. So it is decreed. As the guards dragged a screaming Lacey and a broken Santino away, Estela felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Valerius. It's over, he said. Not yet, Estela replied, turning her gaze toward the back of the hall. Alpha Julian was standing in the shadows of the gallery. He raised a glass of wine to her, a dark, knowing smirk on his face. He pointed to his own throat, then to hers. The blood she had given him. The ritual was just beginning. The dead is still breathing, Valerius, Estela whispered. You're staring at the shadows again. Valerius's voice was soft, but it carried across the empty council chamber. The guards had cleared the hall, and the echoes of Lacey's screams had finally faded. Estela stood by the high windows, watching the moon. It wasn't silver tonight. It was a pale, bruised violet, matching the color of the liquid in Julian's vial. He didn't want my revenge to be the end, Estela said, her hand subconsciously going to the place on her finger where she had drawn blood. He wanted my revenge to be the distraction. While I was fighting Santino, what was Julian doing with that vial? Valerius walked up behind her, his presence a solid weight. Marisol intercepted a message from the Shadow Claw border. Julian didn't head back to his estate. He headed for the peak of the first ancestor. Estela's breath hitched. The peak? That's the highest point in the territory. If he performs a ritual there during the lunar peak, he could broadcast a frequency, Valerius finished, his face darkening. A soul call. He told you the blood of a reborn silver moon was the final ingredient. He didn't mean it would break the council. He meant it would break the will of every wolf who hears it. The ground beneath them suddenly hummed. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a low-frequency vibration that seemed to settle in Estela's very marrow. In the distance, a beam of violet light shot into the sky from the northern peak, piercing through the clouds like a needle. He's starting, Estela said. Her phone buzzed, a mass alert sent to all pack members. She looked down and gasped. It wasn't a text. It was a video feed. Julian was standing at the altar of the peak, his hands stained with her violet blood. Wolves of the 7 packs. Julian's voice boomed from every device in the hall. For too long, you have been led by weak men who poison their own children to stay in power. Tonight, the blood of the pure returns. Tonight, we don't just shift. We evolve. He poured the remaining drops of Estela's blood into a fire at the center of the altar. The flames turned green, then black. Valerius, look. Estela pointed out the window. In the courtyard below, the council guards, trained, disciplined men, were falling to their knees. They weren't in pain. They were changing. Their fur was turning a dark, charcoal gray, and their eyes were glowing with the same sickly green fire as the shadow hulk that had attacked their car. He's turning them into thralls, Valerius hissed, reaching for his radio. Marisol, lock down the north. Don't let anyone hear that frequency. It's too late, Estela whispered. She felt a pull in her own chest, a tugging at the soul that Julian had helped her reclaim. He's using my blood as the bridge. He's telling them I'm their new Luna, but he's the one holding the leash. If you go up there, he will use your presence to finish the spell. Valerius stood in front of the hangar doors, his hand on the wing of the stealth chopper. The wind was whipping snow into a frenzy around them. The violet light in the sky was growing brighter, casting long, eerie shadows across the mountain range. If I don't go up there, he wins by default, Estela argued, her white wolf fur beginning to prickle beneath her skin. I am the only one who can cancel the frequency. It's my blood, Valerius. My soul. He's a necromancer, Estela. He's been alive for 300 years. Valerius shouted over the roar of the engines. He didn't give you a second chance out of the goodness of his heart. He grew you like a crop. Then let him try to harvest me, Estela snapped. She stepped closer, her golden eyes burning. You told me I was your best weapon. Are you going to keep me in the holster when the world is ending? Valerius searched her face. He saw the girl who had fallen, the girl who had been reborn, and the Luna who had just brought a dynasty to its knees. He stepped aside and opened the cockpit. I'll fly. You prepare to shift, he said. If we hit the peak, you have exactly 3 minutes before his guards overwhelm us. The flight was a blur of turbulence and violet lightning. As they approached the peak of the first ancestor, Estela saw the scale of the horror. Hundreds of wolves were gathered at the base of the mountain, howling in a dissonant, hypnotic chorus. They weren't themselves anymore. They were a hive mind. Valerius hovered the chopper 10 feet above the altar. Go. Estela leapt. She shifted in midair, the massive white wolf crashing onto the stone altar just as Julian was raising his knife for the final incantation. He turned, his scarred face splitting into a wide, delighted grin. "Ah, the masterpiece returns to the gallery," Julian shouted, his voice echoing with supernatural power. "Look at you, Estela. Do you feel the connection? Every wolf in this valley is breathing, because you are breathing." The white wolf growled, a sound that vibrated the very stones of the altar. She lunged, but Julian didn't move. He simply held up the empty vial. "You think you can kill me?" Julian laughed. "I am the one who stitched you back together. If I die, your soul has nowhere to go. You'll crumble into dust, just like the dead girl in Madrid." Estela shifted back into her human form, standing tall amidst the swirling black flames. She felt the drain on her energy, the way Julian was siphoning her life force to power the thralls. "Then we'll go together," Estela said. She didn't attack him. Instead, she knelt and pressed both hands into the stone of the altar. She didn't fight the pull of her blood. She pushed more into it. She flooded the ritual with her own will, her own memories, the pain of the fall, the love she once felt, the rage of the betrayal. "What are you doing?" Julian's smile vanished. "You'll burn out your core." "I'm changing the frequency," Estela gasped, her skin beginning to glow with a blinding silver light. "You wanted a silver moon? Here is the full moon." The violet light began to turn pure, brilliant white. The green fire in the eyes of the thralls below flickered and died, replaced by the natural amber of their own spirits. "No!" Julian screamed, lunging for her. But a shadow fell over him. Valerius had jumped from the chopper, his silver blade drawn. He tackled Julian, the two of them tumbling toward the edge of the cliff. "Estela, finish it!" Valerius roared. Estela let out a scream of pure power. The white light exploded outward, a shockwave that cleared the clouds and shattered the obsidian altar into a million pieces. The frequency snapped. The debt was broken. Silence fell over the mountain. Estela collapsed onto the snow, her breath coming in ragged sobs. The violet light was gone. The moon was silver once more. She looked toward the edge of the cliff. Valerius was hanging onto the jagged rock with one hand. His other hand was gripping Julian's coat. Julian was dangling over the abyss, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and strange, twisted pride. "Let him go," Estela said, her voice a whisper. "If I let go, I don't know if I can pull myself up," Valerius grunted, his muscles straining. "I've got you," Estela said. She reached down, her new strength allowing her to grab Valerius's collar. Julian looked up at her, a bloodied smile on his lips. "You did it, little ghost. You broke the leash. But remember, a wolf without a leash is just a beast waiting to be hunted." He reached up and unbuckled his own coat. "See you in the next life, Estela." Julian fell. He didn't scream. He simply disappeared into the darkness of the canyon, leaving nothing but the sound of the wind. Estela pulled Valerius up onto the ledge. They lay there in the snow, two broken survivors under a quiet sky. "Is it really over?" Valerius asked after a long moment. Estela looked at her hands. They weren't glowing anymore, but she could still feel the wolf inside, strong, silent, and finally free. "The revenge is over," Estela said. "But I think the story is just beginning. If you keep staring at that crown, people are going to think you actually want to wear it." Estela looked away from the silver circlet resting on the velvet cushion. She turned to see Valerius leaning against the balcony door, the safe balcony door of the northern palace. It had been 1 month since the events at the peak. "I don't need a crown to know who I am anymore," Estela said, her voice filled with a quiet confidence that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. "Good," Valerius said, walking over to stand beside her. He looked out over the territory. The packs were no longer fighting. The exposure of Silas and Santino had led to a massive reform in the council. Because being a Luna is mostly just paperwork and listening to alphas complain about border fences. Estela laughed, a genuine sound that echoed through the room. "And what about you, General? Are you still planning on using me as your best weapon?" Valerius turned to her, his expression softening in a way he only allowed when they were alone. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her jaw. I think the weapon has decided she'd rather be the commander. And I'm perfectly fine with taking orders for once. The tension between them, once born of necessity and secrets, had shifted into something warmer, something that felt like a fated bond they had chosen for themselves rather than one forced by destiny. I heard the news from the Grey Waste this morning, Estela said, her tone turning slightly more serious. Santino and Lacey? Valerius asked. They're struggling, Estela said with a shrug. They were caught trying to steal scraps from a rogue camp. The guard said Santino keeps telling everyone he's an alpha, but nobody believes him. He's just a man without a pack, living in the dirt. A fitting end for a man who thought people were disposable, Valerius noted. Estela looked up at the silver moon, feeling the steady, powerful thrum of her wolf spirit inside her. She wasn't the victim anymore. She wasn't the secret daughter or the body-swapped mystery. She was Estela, the silver moon of the north. You know, she whispered, leaning her head against Valerius's shoulder. Julian was right about one thing. What's that? A wolf without a leash is a dangerous thing. But a wolf with a pack? That's an empire. Valerius pulled her closer as the sun began to rise over the mountains, painting the world in shades of gold and violet. The betrayal was a memory. The revenge was a closed book. For the first time in 2 lives, Estela wasn't running. She was exactly where she was meant to be. If you keep staring at that crown, people are going to think you actually want to wear it. Estela looked away from the silver circlet resting on the velvet cushion. She turned to see Valerius leaning against the balcony door, the safe balcony door, of the northern palace. It had been 1 month since the events at the peak. I don't need a crown to know who I am anymore, Estela said, her voice filled with a quiet confidence that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. Good, Valerius said, walking over to stand beside her. He looked out over the territory. The packs were no longer fighting. The exposure of Silas and Santino had led to a massive reform in the council. Because being a Luna is mostly just paperwork and listening to alphas complain about border fences. Estela laughed, a genuine sound that echoed through the room. And what about you, General? Are you still planning on using me as your best weapon? Valerius turned to her, his expression softening in a way he only allowed when they were alone. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her jaw. I think the weapon has decided she'd rather be the commander. And I'm perfectly fine with taking orders for once. The tension between them, once born of necessity and secrets, had shifted into something warmer, something that felt like a fated bond they had chosen for themselves rather than one forced by destiny. I heard the news from the Grey Waste this morning, Estela said, her tone turning slightly more serious. Santino and Lacey? Valerius asked. They're struggling, Estela said with a shrug. They were caught trying to steal scraps from a rogue camp. The guard said Santino keeps telling everyone he's an alpha, but nobody believes him. He's just a man without a pack, living in the dirt. A fitting end for a man who thought people were disposable, Valerius noted. Estela looked up at the silver moon, feeling the steady, powerful thrum of her wolf spirit inside her. She wasn't the victim anymore. She wasn't the secret daughter or the body-swapped mystery. She was Estela, the silver moon of the north. You know, she whispered, leaning her head against Valerius's shoulder. Julian was right about one thing. What's that? A wolf without a leash is a dangerous thing. But a wolf with a pack? That's an empire. Valerius pulled her closer as the sun began to rise over the mountains, painting the world in shades of gold and violet. The betrayal was a memory. The revenge was a closed book. For the first time in 2 lives, Estela wasn't running. She was exactly where she was meant to be.